We're going to start with Donald Trump. Donald Trump and the Paris Accord. So last night we discussed the Paris Accord in terms of what it does or what it was attempting to do. And we discussed it in light of the possibility that Donald Trump would withdraw the United States from the Paris Accords. Today, that possibility became a reality in this afternoon when he announced in the Rose Garden that he would be removing the United States from the Paris Accords. Ironically, there was a jazz band playing along as we waited for the president to speak. And I couldn't help but think of the scene from the Titanic where the four-piece quintet was, or the quartet rather, was playing the song Nearer My God to Thee as the Titanic sunk. I couldn't help but thinking about that as I watched this rather corny jazz band. They're military officers, so I shouldn't say that, right? But the music they were playing was rather corny. Playing the soundtrack to the sinking of America, if I could be so hyperbolic. But to thunderous applause, to the adulation and cheers of quite a few white men, Donald Trump announced that America is no longer going to be a part of the Paris Climate Accord. What does that mean? What does that mean for us? You know, there's only so much that the Paris Accords were going to accomplish. Part of what it was going to accomplish was to help stimulate the business industry around renewable energies and help move the world closer to clean energy. It was a work in progress, or a work that put us on the right track. It was not an agreement. First of all, it wasn't binding, which a lot of people have some qualms with, I less so, but it wasn't binding. It didn't have any sanctions as a mechanism of enforcement, but it did set the world on the right path in terms of the way we view our climate, our environment, and what we're willing to do as a united nations, as a united set of nations. There were only two nations at the time who did not sign on to it, and America is now making the third nation. So I start with that because it's not as though the Paris Climate Accord was going to save us. And I want to put that at the beginning. It was not going to save us. However, it was going to set us on the right track and at least acknowledge that there was a problem. And so President Trump has removed us from that. And not only are we signaling to the world that America is controlled by flat earthers and the Know Nothing Party, but it's also saying that America is no longer interested in moving the conversation with regard to climate change forward, and we're no longer going to be the leading voice on the issue, and we are no longer going to reap the benefits of the numerous opportunities for businesses to move towards clean and renewable energy. That's a big portion of what the Paris Climate Accord did. A couple of statements from different participants, different stakeholders, in which we are all stakeholders. And I think that's something we should also put on the books here before we proceed. We are all stakeholders in this issue. And it's fascinating to me that the climate is one of the most left out issues in our political discourse. We didn't see any significant questions of any type in the presidential debates, the previous presidential debates. We barely had questions, I believe, in the 2012 debate. It's always an afterthought. And in reality, it's something that's going to affect every single person on the face of the earth, some more so than others. If you think about the city of New Orleans, that sits historically, it sits underneath the sea level. And when Hurricane Katrina came, part of the problem was because of the position of the city of New Orleans. New Orleans Mayor Landrieu, he said, quote, climate change is a threat that affects us all and is a real and present danger to our coastal communities. If unchecked, New Orleans, like many coastal cities, will cease to exist as the world committed to take actions. New Orleans did too. So there are plenty of stakeholders across the country, across the world, that are disappointed in this move by President Trump. Now, why did he do it? That's the next question. Why did he do it? It's easy to say that he's doing it just because he's an idiot. And I think that is part of the calculus. And then there's another argument that he's trying to undo every single thing that President Obama did. And even there's a quote from Mitch McConnell that alluded to that, that this is a way of, in many regards, of trying to stick it again, yet again, to President Obama, because Donald Trump is perpetually at war or in a competition with the previous president. But most of all, the reason you had so many applauding gentlemen, and I use that term loosely, in the Rose Garden this afternoon, was because there are business interests that still do not want to even admit the nature and the implications of climate change. And Donald Trump began quoting some information, some stats as to the effects that the Paris Climate Accord would have on various industries. And I want to read a couple of those stats to you, but then also give you context of where he got the stats from. And so he quoted, he said that 2.7 million jobs will be lost by 2025 because of the Paris Climate Accords. And this includes 400,000 fewer manufacturing jobs. He also said in his speech that the paper industry would be down by 12%. The cement industry would be down by 23%. The iron and steel industries would be down by 38%. Coal would be down by 86%. And natural gas will be down by 31%. Now, all of these numbers that he quoted and cited today came from NERA, the National Economic Research Associates. It's a right-leaning economic consulting firm. And these numbers reflect a particular worldview. In 2011, this same firm, NERA, the National Economic Research Associates, rather, they did a coal industry front group, American Coalition for Clean Coal Electricity, paid for a report from NERA, which Bloomberg called, quote, a part of a campaign to delay compliance deadlines and the pending rules. In other words, this is a quasi think tank that has been rolled out before by Republican administrations and Republican conservative leaning organizations and business interests that are opposed to climate change regulation or changes in the first place. The National Economic Research Associates, they rolled this information out almost as a weaponized tool. A tool to stifle the conversation that's necessary to reverse or at least halt or at least mitigate some of the effects of climate change. And yet President Trump saw fit to use this politically driven, politically, ideologically driven research foundation, and I use that phrase lightly. He saw fit to roll that out as the justification as to why the United States should withdraw from the Paris Climate Accord. Couple of other quotes here from President Trump in the Rose Garden, showing you the erroneous nature of the entire event as justification as to why the United States should pull out. He continuously referred to how it would place the United States at a disadvantage with regard to other nations. And he said, quote, for example, under the agreement, China will be able to increase the emissions by a staggering number of 13 years. They can do whatever they want for 13 years, not us. India makes its participation contingent upon receiving billions and billions of dollars in foreign aid from developed countries. There are many examples, but the bottom line is that the Paris Accord is very unfair at the highest level to the United States. And so he uses this as an excuse, saying that because China, according to the accord, has until 2030, which they do 13 years from now. But the reality of it is that China is already on track to beat that target. And so he throws out this straw man, this red herring almost, to obfuscate the conversation, which he gets to do because no one is going to challenge him on the scene, and no one's obviously going to challenge him in the administration because this is what they all want. And so he throws this out there as a justification to say China is going to be able to do whatever they want to do by 2030 for 13 years. In reality, China is already on track to beat that. And so they have shown that they have a vested interest in improving the conditions around climate change. But that's another justification that he gave as to why America should pull out of this. Donald Trump went on and said, this includes ending the implementation of the nationally determined contribution and, very importantly, the Green Climate Fund, which is costing the United States a vast fortune. in the actuality, Obama committed the U.S. to $3 billion to help developing countries to adapt to the changing situations and conditions. And Donald Trump himself gave the military $15 billion increase in their budget when the military said that climate change is going to be a contributor to instability worldwide. And so on the one hand, he's pulling us out of the climate accords, but on the other hand, he's more than happy to fund the defense contractors, fund the Defense Department with regard to climate change. So this is another quote from him. I want to give you his words so that you can see how ridiculous this is. He said, "On the issues and so many more, we're following through on our commitments. And I don't want anything to get out of the way. I am fighting every day for the great people of this country. Therefore, in order to fulfill my solemn duty to protect America and its citizens, the United States will withdraw from the Paris Climate Accord." I always love the political spin when someone who is doing something that is damning and damaging to you say, "I'm doing this because it's my responsibility to take care of you. It's my responsibility to protect Americans." In actuality, he has exposed America to a path, a path that we won't even acknowledge we're on. At a minimum, would we at least acknowledge that we're headed in this direction? And in many ways, the climate accords were not enough to halt the momentum that climate change has already had. However, now we're in a position where we won't even acknowledge the problem. Now the people that are in power, and I think this is the most disturbing part about it, the people that are in power are more comfortable saying that if climate change is real, that God would take care of it in one breath. And in the next breath, they said that, oh, we're supposed to be good stewards of what God created. I'm not sure if there's much more to say about this. There are a couple of quotes here from President Obama, former President Obama. He had a few things to say about it. This is President Obama in his comments towards this decision to pull us out of the climate accords. He says, simply put, in regards to the jobs that are going to be lost, or the jobs that Donald Trump claims are going to be lost, and in regards to the effects that this decision is going to have, President Obama said this. He says, simply put, the private sector already chose a low carbon future. And for the nations that committed themselves to that future, the Paris Agreement opened the floodgates for businesses, scientists, and engineers to unleash high-tech, low-carbon investment and innovation on an unprecedented scale. And that's the missing component in this conversation. On one hand, there are those of us who are concerned about the environment. But on the flip side, there are a lot of businesses that are going to be left out of the opportunities that the Paris Climate Accord created for even more business for, as President Obama said, high-tech, low-carbon investment and innovation on an unprecedented scale. The United States is going to be left out of that as a collective nation. And here we are with the President of the United States now, Donald Trump, saying that this is in the best interest of protecting America. Doublespeak is putting it light.